And so when we think about differentiating learning outcomes, one of the things that we have to think about when we're looking at evaluation is what types of outcomes are we looking for? And so when we're designing instruction and we're talking about what types of knowledge are we hoping to elicit to our learners, we can break this down into procedural knowledge, conceptual knowledge, and conditional knowledge. And so if I were to look at, so I'll just use L&D as an example. If we were looking at conceptual knowledge as it relates to instructional design, a training module might be telling you the definition of instructional design. It could be walking you through the various aspects of that ADDIE process, how we engage in analysis, design development, implementation, and evaluation, whether we're designing for face-to-face instruction or online learning experiences. If we were looking at conceptual knowledge, this is where anything that we know about learning theory, we think back to psychology classes we may have taken, behavioralism, how we reinforce different concepts with our learners, that would all fall into that conceptual knowledge. And when you start thinking about what that might look like in some of the training materials that we deliver, oftentimes those could be questions you might see embedded within a learning module or at the end of a learning module, perhaps those knowledge checks, or you might see some multiple choice questions where people are responding to recognizing definitions and facts related to whatever your subject matter might be. If we were to look at procedural knowledge, that's going to be looking specifically at what types of procedures are required to be followed or should be followed when we're completing certain tasks. And so if we were looking at, just sticking with our instructional design example, if something was related to how you might engage in storyboarding, if you were designing an e-learning module and getting feedback from your team, we'd be very prescriptive in what types of steps we would recommend that a novice instructional designer practice when engaging in storyboarding. And if our organization had certain rules or procedures on how that gets disseminated to other members or other departments that may be involved in that L&D process, that would probably also be included in those procedural knowledge type activities. But when we get to the third one, conditional knowledge, for the instructional designers and L&D professionals, you know that instructional design does not occur in a vacuum, and oftentimes we feel like we are juggling multiple plates in the air. And so conditional knowledge comes into play when we start looking at what some of those different design constraints may be. Perhaps we've been asked to deliver training on a very limited time frame. Perhaps we've been given a very small budget to be able to do it, or perhaps no budget at all. When we start looking at resources and what we have access to, we may be limited to using particular tools and platforms depending on what the needs are of that project and who our learners are and where they're dispersed around the country or around the world. And so when that happens, we have to start making adjustments to how we're going to be applying knowledge that we have related to instructional design. And so this is where we're looking at that conditional knowledge, when different contextual factors can influence and change how we might approach a situation. And so if we were to look at any subject matter, we can look beyond instructional design, any subject matter that you might be delivering instruction for, or you might be responsible for designing instruction for. Ideally, for somebody to be able to see that it's relevant and value it, and to have that perception of utility, that they're going to be able to use that information on their jobs, if we truly want to be able to evaluate it and say, yes, we are delivering, we are impacting our organization's performance, we should be able to produce metrics that would address procedural knowledge, conceptual knowledge, and conditional knowledge. And in the challenge that a lot of us will face in L&D is that sometimes we have those opportunities to do that. Sometimes the nature of how training is being how we're being asked to design and deliver that instruction is going to make this very challenging. About how do we integrate learning goals into those department goals and into those organizational goals and that broader view. It's really starting to think about what types of metrics do we have? How would we know if a learner thought that it was relevant? How would we know that we're driving impact with performance? Or as you start thinking about how you're evaluating your L&D efforts.